ladies. We're so glad to have you back. We are in week 5 of the Names of God. I can't believe we're already there. And my name is Deidre, and I'm joined by 2 of my friends.
I'm Jennifer Lorick.
And Shay.
This week, we get to talk about a name of God that is incredibly personal to me. It's the name Jehovah Jireh, or the Lord our provider. It's really personal because on several occasions in my life, God has decided to show up in this manner in very practical ways. I actually remember standing in the middle of a Victory Outreach Chapel when I was in college. I had been sent on mission for the summer, and I was standing there thinking, God, this doesn't make sense. Why am I here raising money when I should be working to pay for college? And I remember as if it was yesterday, he said to me, Deidre, if you trust me as your Jehovah Jireh, I will build your faith. And sure enough, he did. I could tell you many, many stories, but instead of that, I'm going to let these 2 share some of their stories. Either one.
Okay, I'll go first. Well, it's almost like hard to pick. It's almost kind of like cool when you think about God as a provider because there's so many different avenues. But the one I was thinking about is actually kind of embarrassing, but kind of awesome. And so, disclaimer: nobody judge me because I was really young.
Safe space.
Okay. Safe space. So I think I was like 23 and unexpectedly was asked to lead a team of college students to Argentina. Someone else had planned the trip and at the last second found out that if he left to take all these students, he wouldn't be allowed back in the country because of his visa. So a week before this 3-month-long trip, I was asked to take over. And young and full of faith, I was like, yes! So go down to Argentina, and we had a day off. And I think our contacts needed a day off from us. And so they're like, if you want to go into town and go shopping, just take the 12A bus into town, and that's the bus you'll take back. And yeah, you should be able to fend for yourselves and have some fun. So we're like, great. So we go into town, hang out, and come back to the bus stop, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and we're waiting, and like no bus. And we waited for like an hour and a half, and finally, the 12 bus shows up. We all pile on. We're so relieved, and really unfamiliar with this area. And as the bus drive goes on and on and on, things are looking less familiar, and there's less buildings, and we finally get to like this final, we're the last ones on the bus. We get there, and the bus driver communicates to us like, end of the line. You all have to get off. And it kind of reminds you like those Western movies where they like get out and it's a ghost town and there's like eagles going like, like it was like that, but Argentina. And I just was at a loss. Clearly, we're not where we're supposed to be. Yeah. We didn't have really anyone who knew enough Spanish that we could like get through, and there was just a gas station. And my heart is like pounding out of my chest. And anyway, we ask if we can use the phone. We try to call our contacts. No one's picking up. So I'm freaking out. There's 16 college students that I'm responsible for, and we are lost in the middle of the desert. And I couldn't even communicate where we were. Like, it was our first couple days there. Anyway, this gentleman comes in, really quiet, and we're praying at this point. Like, what do we do? And I tried to just like ask the guy if he knew where we were and where the place that we were trying to go was so that we could even get a taxi. And he was like, I know where that is. I'll take you. And it was that moment where, this is why I'm asking you not to judge me. I just prayed so hard, and I was like, God, give me the discernment that if, like, this is a red flag, and we shouldn't be getting into a car with strangers.
In Argentina?
In Argentina. And I don't even know, am I even communicating clearly? But yeah, he was like, oh yeah, I know where that is, I'll take you. So 3 car rides back and forth, he took all 16 of us in his little Honda hatchback, and through what looked like more desert. And I was like, are we gonna die? But he dropped us off right in front of the location.
Wow.
And wouldn't take any money. And I just remember standing there in shock being like, I needed a miracle. I needed God to show up because I got everyone into this mess, and God provided someone who knew, who was willing, who was kind to get
really
us out
cool,
of that
Shay.
mess.
That's really awesome. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
Yeah, so, of course we think about like the physical, like God provides your needs and wants, your lucky. He'll give you some things that you want.
Yeah.
But, I just remember about 7 years ago, my husband was like, how do you feel about moving to Fort Worth? I didn't know a soul in Texas. So I was like, sure. Who's going to move all this stuff? He's like, oh, my job's going to move. I'm like, we can leave tomorrow. Because I didn't have to pack. So anyway, we came down here for our house hunting trip. And in the neighborhood the neighborhood that we ended up living in was still kind of under development stage or whatever. So we go and we look at these houses, and we were in reverse in a rental car. You remember this story? Yes. So we were in a rental car that didn't have a backup camera. Said the driver of the rental car. It wasn't me. But anyway, so it didn't have a backup camera, and we found ourselves in the ditch. And so, and it's like 1,000 degrees in Texas, because I think it was like July. And so it was 1,000 degrees, and I had a 2-year-old and a little 7-month-old baby. And we're standing in the street, and this lady comes, and I'm like, oh, we don't know anybody. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know a soul in Texas. But this lady comes down the street, and she was so kind. I probably could name drop, but I don't know if I'm going to. Anyway, but she was really kind, and so she offered for us to get in the car with her and just, whatever we needed. But she didn't have space to take us anywhere because she was on her way. But she sat and she talked. And she talked to me, we exchanged numbers, and then by that time, a neighbor, a guy came and pulled us out of the ditch, pulled the car out of the ditch. But so God provided that neighbor to come and pull, but I also think that He provided me with a friend, a first friend that I had in Texas, and I thought that was amazing because I didn't know anyone. This lady, when I went back to Kentucky, texted me She texted me a couple days after we gotten back, and then I texted her again and told her, hey, we're going to move into that neighborhood. And then she, just kept in contact with me, and really God provided a sense of community with other ladies in the neighborhood. And
you're still friends today.
We're still friends today, yeah.
Cool.
And it's really cool. And I think I'm still saved in her phone as Jennifer I met in the street. But just how, I really didn't have any concerns about moving here to Texas, but it was just really nice that God had already provided me with somebody that I was going to meet in the street who was going to become a friend and then introduce me to a bunch of different friends. And as my husband's job transitioned into him traveling a lot, it was really helpful to have that sense of community and have people that I can drop my kids off to if I needed to run an errand or if there was an emergency or something like that if he was out of town. So I'm very thankful that He provided me with that community here in Texas. So.
Yeah, that's so cool. Thanks so much for sharing, both of you. That's really fun just to hear stories of how God shows up in different ways as our Jehovah Jireh.
Yeah.
Like I said, it's a really personal name for me. I actually have a journal called my Jireh journal. Because in college, I didn't have anything, and the Lord showed up in really practical and often very financial ways to get me through college. But I want to tell a story today that comes from later, and it's from when we were pregnant with our first child. Cameron and I, my husband and I, were working as missionaries in inner city Los Angeles, and you guys, I don't think we had 2 pennies to rub together. We were poor, but we were happy. We were doing what we were called to do, and we were happy. But I didn't really know how we were going to provide all the things a baby needs. Why are babies so expensive? Can somebody explain that to me? I don't. Anyway, but all the things, car seats and cribs, let alone diapers, just all the stuff. And at the time, my husband's parents are full-time missionaries. And they had expressed how much they wished they could just give us everything, but they didn't have the means. My parents were full-time pastors, and they didn't have the means either. But we knew it didn't matter. The Lord would take care of us. Well, the organization we worked for did a ton of things around our community, and we worked in a really impoverished community. One of the things they did is they had this big old warehouse where places like Bed Bath & Beyond, Target, all these places would just donate stuff. Lots and lots of stuff that got returned and they couldn't resell or just overstock they wanted to get rid of. And they liked getting the donation tax credit on the side. The only deal was our organization couldn't sell it. We had to give it away. I knew it existed. I worked in a classroom, so every now and then things I needed would show up from the warehouse. But I had never been in the warehouse, and I didn't really know anything about it. It wasn't for me, it was for the people we served. Well, one time I was very pregnant, like 7 months, big old belly, waddling around campus. And the director of the warehouse said to me, "Hey, it's your turn." And I said, what do you mean it's my turn? Apparently, pregnant women get to go shopping in the warehouse. And I was like, oh, cool. And I knew we had tons of diapers. Like they did food trucks and they always gave diapers. And I thought, we're going to get diapers for a year. This is cool, you know? And so we show up, my husband and I, not knowing what to expect. And y'all, like, you know those industrial sized laundry bins that could fit like 6 of us in them? They had 2 of them. And they had one for my husband to push and one for him to push. And I swear I tried to tell them no because they gave us so much. I'm going to cry a little bit. We got back to our living room. They helped us get it all in there, and we couldn't walk around our living room. I even got a vacuum cleaner just because they're like, you need a new vacuum? Here you go. Like, we got a crib. We got a changing table. We got 3 car seats. Why 3? I don't know. One was the big kid one was the little kid one, and we gave one to a family member who needed one. Like, anything you could think you need with a baby, we got. And it is amazing, right? And I sat in my living room just overcome. He had shown up in so many big ways in my life already, and that he would show up in this way. And I just felt like he said to me, this isn't just your blessing. This is the blessing of the faithfulness of your parents. And realizing, like, as they had faithfully chosen to serve him for so many years, trusting him to provide for his children, he did in this really, really tangible, abundant way. So it was a really sweet blessing for us, but it was also a really sweet blessing for our parents. And I think that story comes to mind this week because it's not really all that different from the story we're going to read today. A story where a parent trusted God to provide in a miraculous way. And when God did, that child was richly blessed. The story is in Genesis 22. So if you have a Bible, you can go ahead and pull it out, and we're going to read there in a second. But before we do, let me just remind you of where we're at. A few weeks ago, if you had a chance to be with us, you remember that Shay taught us about this guy named Abram and his wife Sarai. In case you missed it, or you just can't remember that far back, I'll catch you up. Abram was chosen by God to be the father of God's nation. One problem: no kids. It's hard to be a father of a nation if you've yet to have any children. But God promised he will make it happen, and then he gives them new names, Abraham and Sarah, and that's where we catch up with them now. When Sarah's 90 years old, she finally gives birth to Isaac. Imagine that. Do you want to give birth at 90?
No.
I don't either. Heck no. But anyway, there's so much in that story that you should go back and read it all, or re-listen to Shay. Like, there's so much even on what happened in their life leading up to that moment. So if you have a chance, go read it. But anyway, where we are, I bet we can imagine that Abraham and Sarah had waited a very, very long time for this child. They had exhausted all of their humanly options, and they'll then still had to wait for over a decade for God to fulfill his promise. That's where we are. Well, we're past that, right? He's fulfilled his promise. And so now I'm going to read to you what God does. I should warn you, there are some really dicey things we're going to read in this chapter. For the sake of time, I won't have a chance to go into all of them, but that doesn't mean you can't on your own time. So I encourage you, go read about Abraham's life in Genesis. Anyway, we're going to start in Genesis 22, verse 1. Sometime later, after Isaac was born, God tested Abraham. He said to him, "Abraham." "Here I am," he replied. Then God said, "Take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you." I told you it was going to get dicey. Early the next morning, Abraham got up and loaded his donkey. He took with him 2 of his servants and his son Isaac. When he had cut enough wood for the burnt offering, he sent out for the place God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while I and the boy go over there. We will worship, and then we will come back to you." Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and placed it on his son Isaac, and he himself carried the fire and the knife. As the 2 of them went on together, Isaac spoke up and said to his father, "Father?" "Yes, my son," said Abraham replied. "The fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered, "God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering." And the two of them went on together. When they reached the place God had told him about, Abraham built an altar and there arranged the wood on it. He bound his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven, "Abraham, Abraham!" "Here I am," he replied. "Do not lay a hand on the boy," he said. "Do not do anything to him. Now I know that you fear God, because you have not withheld from me your son, your only son." So Abraham looked up. There in the thicket he saw a ram caught by its horns. He went over and took the ram and sacrificed it as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called that place Jehovah-Jireh, the Lord will provide. And to this day it is said, on the mountain of the Lord it will be provided. So I'm going to be honest, I was surprised to discover that this is the only place in the Hebrew Bible where the name Jehovah-Jireh appears. God as our provider is something we hear a lot about. The fact that God provides for creation, and especially his children, is sprinkled all throughout Scripture. Providing for us is really just a function of his fatherhood. In the Gospels, Jesus urges us to trust the Father's good provision, reminding us that if our earthly fathers who have sin in their hearts can give us good gifts, how much more will our Heavenly Father, with his pure heart, provide for us? He knows what we need even before we ask it of him. And whether you had a father who provided for you or not, I think we can all agree that across time and culture, one of the duties of a parent is to provide for their children. Sometimes it's financial, sometimes it's a ride, sometimes it's a friend. But parents provide for their kids, and that's what God does for us as our Heavenly Father. Honestly, that's kind of where my understanding of Jehovah-Jireh stopped for many years. He's my dad. He provides for me. He takes care of me. I'll be good. I don't always get everything that I want, but I definitely get the things I need. But that's a really shallow understanding of this name. So let's go back to the story of Abraham and Isaac. Do you notice? Never once did Abraham question or hesitate. He got the instruction, and early the next morning, he set out to sacrifice his son. That alone feels like a huge ask. But Isaac wasn't just his son. Isaac was also Abraham's connection to God's plan and purpose for his life. Abraham had already risked everything on the word of this God. This God had promised to make him into a great nation. This God had promised that through Abraham's offspring, all of creation, present, past, and future, would be blessed. The offspring God was now requiring him to sacrifice. And let's be honest, there was no hope of another child. Isaac was the miracle they had waited decades for. Not to mention, they were already beyond child-rearing ages when he was conceived, right? This was it. And still, Abraham doesn't hesitate. It's even more. Some speculate that he left so early in the morning so he didn't have to tell Sarah, and he deprived her of the opportunity to forbid him from doing it. He likely left his servants behind so they could not intervene on Isaac's behalf. Abraham went to worship God in the way God had required of him, and he made sure all distractions were left at the bottom of the hill. As he marched on, resolute that God would provide, remember verse 8, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. He might not have known how, but he wasn't about to let anyone stand in the way of God's provision. And God shows up, but not just for Abraham. The details of this story, the 3-day journey, the son of promise carrying the wood he was to be sacrificed on, the sacrificial lamb, they make it clear that this is an allegory of our Savior and the sacrifice he made on our behalf. Jehovah-Jireh literally means I am will see to it, and he has. All we have ever needed is met in him. Some of you remember that his name, I am, is a promise not just to provide for you, but to be your provision in every moment, every relationship, every hope, even the deferred ones. Some of you already know this, and you know it just like Abraham knew it. You've lived it. The circumstances may have been different, but you've seen this play out in your life. And God may have walked you right into it, just like he did with Abraham. Because here's the thing. We tend to learn these lessons best when the stakes are high. We tend to really understand the purity of God's promises once our life has gone through the fire. That was Abraham's story. And he had seen some, if you know what I mean. He likely felt like he was on the other side of it, right? All the had happened, and now he had his son. He had his provision, but he wasn't on the other side of it. Oh, I lost my spot. Hold on. Thanks for your patience.
It happens.
I know, right? He wasn't on the other side of it. God brought a new challenge for him. Again, some of you know what this is like. Some of you believe this truth, but don't yet know it in your bones. Others of you are walking through it in this very moment. You look at the circumstances you find yourself in, and you want with all your might to believe that he alone is enough. That him alone as your provision is all you will ever need, and he will get you through that trial. I urge you, lean into it. Don't run from it. Trust him to show up for you, just as he did for Abraham. And here's my other challenge. Sisters, if you've lived it, if you've walked through this, share your story with us. We need you not to give us the simple, God's good, he's got it all under control, but the answer that says, I've been there. I know your pain, and I promise you that my God is big enough. That is the answer we need. This journey that we walk on together needs to be done in community, because wherever you find yourself on this spectrum, you need each other to get further along. So in thinking about that, I wonder, friends, if either of you have a story about how, or can tell us how the fact that God not just providing for you, but being your provision gives you hope, or maybe even challenges you in the seasons you're in today.
So, I think for me, it's a little bit of both. As we look at the events that have happened over the past 7 months or so, it's easy to jump on a slogan or a hashtag or a side of things, and it's easy to be filled with anger and despair and just, I don't know, exhaustion.
Yeah.
But so it's challenged me, like, I think knowing that God's providing has challenged me to remember his word and to remember the peace and to remember what his promises are, and to know that even though, even though things may not look the way that I want them to look, I have to trust that he's going to provide for me no matter what. He's going to give me the peace. And that's kind of where I've rested right now. He's given me the peace that surpasses all understanding. There's things that I won't know. We won't know until we get to heaven.
Yeah.
So I would encourage people to find that peace and to be that peacemaker. And just to look on what he says he's going to do. You know, he says he's going to come and he's going to make everything whole. And this is not our home. This is not our home.
Yeah.
And he calls us to do certain things. He calls us to share his gospel. And that's another challenge. Like, what am I doing? God has provided me with this Bible and his word, and he has given me a new life. And my job is to spread his love. And that's what I have to do. Regardless of the circumstance, all that is distraction. And it's hard because, you know, old flesh jumps on you, but but you know, you have to think about, like for me, I have to look at what his word asks, look at what he asks, what he calls me to do. He calls me to love him, love others, and make disciples. Am I making disciples based on this side or this side, or am I making disciples to something that is everlasting and is kingdom building? And if I can focus in on his provision of his word and what he's asked me to do, all that other stuff is noise that I have to challenge myself to block out and accept that.
I am moved to tears by your strength and your wisdom. Thank you for sharing with us.
You're welcome.
You just had to go first.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
That's really good. I think there's kind of, I don't want to verbally process all over y'all, so but I think I agree with him being the provider is him being our provision. It does bring hope, but also it brings some anticipation. Like, I'm anxious to see what God's going to do. Like, there's just a lot of brokenness that I see, and I've been telling my husband, like, I feel wrecked by a lot of injustices that I see in the world, and vulnerable people being put in more vulnerable situations, and it seems so hopeless. And yet it is hopeless within the context of this world, but yet that doesn't change how dire and desperate I feel some of the circumstances are. And so I just have to throw myself at the truth of who God is, even if I can't even see. How are you going to provide? How are you going to provide for justice?
Yeah.
It just feels so daunting. But, you know, on a more personal level, it does bring hope. I was telling y'all earlier, we're very lucky. It was a very small amount, but one of our bank accounts was compromised this week, and it doesn't look like there's going to be a way to have that recovered. And so when we were talking about God as provider, I was like, yes, Lord, please remind me how you're going to provide. And having the opportunity to think about all the times he has, and that he has done that evidence, but to have this opportunity to be focused on, it's not even about what he did provide tangibly, it's him. At the end of the day, it's him and his promises and who his character is. That pales over anything tangible. But just on like a personal note, it also made me think too, I think I've been believing this lie that because I've had some really dramatic provision stories, that like I'm not going to ask anymore. Because like you've already done that for me a bajillion times. Like,
I get that.
And as you were sharing, I realized like if it was like a trade, like I've done this many things and you filled your quota, then that would make sense. But being reminded that he is the provision, there is no quota. And I don't have to be afraid to ask God or to look to him or to trust him. And so this has been really beautiful and really good, because it's not about an exchange. It's about his character. And so then it takes it beyond the tangible, and it does bring that hope in a different way that, like you were saying, it suspends outside of what we can see.
Yeah, and I was really challenged by Abraham as I studied, because I feel like from the beginning, you see that God was the provision. He wasn't going to let his wife get in the way. He wasn't going to let himself second guess it. He got up early to do it. He knew, regardless of what happened. Some think he thought God was going to raise his son from the dead, but he really had no idea. He just knew, my God is good and my God is going to provide. And as I think back through the times when he provided tangibly, or even times when we've walked through really hard things, I feel like his question remains the same. Am I enough? Deidre, am I enough for you? And I want to be a person who answers with a resounding yes, Lord. Yes, you are enough. And so whatever you're facing, I hope that as you look at the Jehovah Jireh, you will realize that he is your provision. I'm not saying it'll be easy. I'm not saying you have to deny the disappointment or the hurt. but lean into Him and let Him show you how He is your provision. Thanks, ladies. We'll see you next week.